I'm Michael LeBeau.
And I'm John Dyer V.
With NewsWrap, a summary of some of the news in or affecting LGBTQ communities around the world for the week ending October 26, 2019. They called hoping to be rescued from a homophobic mob, but they wound up being taken to jail and physically abused by police. The 16 gay men work at the LGBTQ rights group Let's Walk Uganda near Kampala. At least some of them also live there. The slur-shouting horde descended on their offices on October 21st. Officers who arrested the gays claimed that the detentions followed complaints from the public. Police officials say that a search of the facilities turned up lubricants, condoms, and antiviral drugs. Each man was given a forced anal exam. The scientifically debunked and crudely invasive exams supposedly determine whether or not a man has engaged in homosexual acts. Uganda punishes such acts with up to life in prison. The activist group announced on Facebook on October 24th that all 16 men had been released on bond. They are each charged with human trafficking and carnal knowledge against the order of nature. The police raid comes amid increasing harassment and violence against people perceived to be LGBTQ in the East African nation's already inhospitable environment. It's known that at least 4 gay Ugandans have been brutally murdered in the past few months. Why the upsurge in anti-queer sentiment? Conflicting government statements during the past few weeks suggested that the Anti-Homosexuality Act might be reintroduced. Its last incarnation was known around the world as the Kill the Gays Bill because it included the death penalty for so-called aggravated homosexuality. A court nullified the law in a legal technicality 5 years ago.
There's joyous news from Northern Ireland.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That was the scene at Belfast's Maverick Bar when marriage equality came to Northern Ireland at the stroke of midnight on October 21st. The semi-functional British Parliament had given Northern Ireland's dysfunctional government until then to act on the issue. Few, if any, thought they would. Northern Ireland was the last major marriage equality holdout in the UK. Under provisions of the new laws, lesbian and gay couples will be able to start walking down the aisle on Valentine's Day 2020. Abortion was also decriminalized. The new laws won't fully come into force until March of next year, but they specify that no woman will be prosecuted for seeking abortion services as of October 22nd. Northern Ireland's majority Democratic Unionists Party, the DUP, has strongly opposed marriage equality. They tried in vain to stop the legislation imposed by Parliament from taking effect. Party spokeswoman Arlene Foster said that the DUP would introduce laws to protect religious liberty. That includes the right of religious institutions to refuse to conduct marriage ceremonies for same-gender couples. Foster also said that the party would offer a private member's bill to stop what she called the liberalization of abortion legislation. That didn't stop LGBTQ people and their supporters in venues big and small across Northern Ireland from celebrating the new laws.
The Australian Bureau of Statistics is under fire for dropping questions about sexuality and gender identity from the planned 2021 census. The government of Pentecostal Christian Prime Minister Scott Morrison denies that the questions were dumped at their direction. Nevertheless, Bureau Chief David Kalish told a Senate panel that his agency had destroyed about half of the 40,000 forms it had already printed that contained those questions. Kalish says the forms were trashed to comply with what he called a government minister's expressed preference prior to a mid-October test run. The census is conducted every 5 years to guide government in its allocation of services. Liberal Party MP Katie Allen from the ruling coalition government is calling for those questions to be restored. She said it was ultimately the government's decision, not the Bureau's. In Allen's words, it's important to include those questions because we know the LGBTI communities are more vulnerable with regards to some aspects of healthcare provision, particularly some aspects of mental health care. Opposition Labour Party Shadow Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones and Senator Jenny McAllister call reports of the omissions deeply concerning. Their joint statement insists that objection to a community or their sexual orientation is no reason to refuse to collect important information to help guide government service delivery.
Canadian LGBTQ rights supporters are breathing a semi-sweet sigh of relief this week with the successful re-election of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The staunchly pro-queer Liberal Party leader defeated climate change-denying anti-choice conservative Andrew Scheer. Scheer still disdains marriage equality, even all these years since its enactment. However, Trudeau's party lost its majority in the House of Commons. He's expected to form a government with backing from two left-leaning minority parties. The initiatives the Liberal Party campaigned on include ending the ban on blood donations by men who have sex with men. Outlawing so-called conversion therapy is also on their platform. Trudeau's re-election bid was hampered by scandal. Photos have surfaced showing him in brownface and blackface during his younger days. He's also accused of bullying his former Attorney General, an Indigenous woman. Leading Canadian queer advocacy group EGAL cheered Trudeau's victory based on the rights advances of his first 4 years. A spokesperson told Pink News that EGAL is hopeful that Trudeau's second term will continue this momentum as we move forward.
New Zealand is now the 34th country to refuse entry to the rabidly homophobic U.S. preacher Steven Anderson. Anderson leads the Faithful Word Baptist Church in Phoenix, Arizona. He in turn warned that New Zealand was in trouble with the Lord. According to immigration officials, the pastor is an excluded person because Mr. Anderson has previously been deported or excluded from other countries. Anderson is a Holocaust denier who notoriously celebrated the 2016 massacre at the predominantly queer Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. He called the mass shooting good news because, in his words, these homosexuals are a bunch of disgusting perverts and pedophiles. One of Anderson's inflammatory YouTube videos proclaims that if you execute the homos like God recommends, you wouldn't have AIDS. Is it any surprise that Anderson and his fringe congregation are on the list of hate groups compiled by the Southern Poverty Law Center? New Zealand joins Australia, Canada, Botswana, Jamaica, South Africa, Ireland, and the United Kingdom in denying entry to the unapologetic purveyor of homophobia. He's also barred from the 26 countries that comprise the common European travel area, Schengen. Anderson warns that God is not going to bless a country that is turning away a missionary. They are going to be under the wrath of God and the punishment of God. There has not been evidence of any particular wrath against the visa-denying nations thus far.
Finally, Chick-fil-A is pecking at Scotland. The certifiably anti-queer fast food franchise quietly opened an outlet at the McDonald Aviemore Resort in the Scottish Highlands in early October. It's now one of 4 eateries at the 4-star resort. The corporate owners of Chick-fil-A are led by evangelical Southern Baptist CEO Dan Cathy. Cathy calls marriage equality an act of arrogance against God. His company has proudly given millions of dollars to blatantly anti-queer organizations and programs. Multiple reports list the Fellowship of Christian Athletes among recent beneficiaries. Chick-fil-A gave more than $1.5 million to that vocal opponent of marriage equality. Another donation went to a home for troubled youth that requires residents to strictly obey their interpretation of New Testament teachings. The sinner-loving, sin-hating Salvation Army has also feasted on Chick-fil-A's millions. The restaurant is the 3rd largest in the U.S., behind McDonald's and Subway. A Toronto franchisee who opened Canada's first Chick-fil-A was greeted by days of LGBTQ and allies protests. Similar demonstrations hit the first Chick-fil-A outlet in Britain. The owners of the Reading shopping center that hosts the eatery there have announced that its lease would not be extended beyond its initial 6-month trial period. Back in Scotland, a local newspaper reports that McDonald Resort visitors are giving their new fowl sandwich outlet a thumbs up on Twitter. But that was before the word got out. We wonder how long it will be before queer activists decide to hike the Scottish Highlands.
That's NewsWrap, global queer news with attitude for the week ending October 26, 2019. Follow the news in your area and around the world. An informed community is a strong community.
NewsWrap is written by Greg Gordon, edited by Lucia Chappelle, produced by Brian DeShazor, recorded at the studios of KPFK Los Angeles, and brought to you by you.
Help keep us in ears around the world at thiswayout.org, where you can also read the text of this newscast and much more.
And you can listen to NewsWrap each week by subscribing to our This Way Out Radio YouTube channel. For This Way Out, I'm John Dyer V.
And I'm Michael LeBeau.